The detention center's infrastructure is crumbling. The prisoners are aging and medical facilities are limited. U.S. law doesn't permit Guantanamo's detainees to be transferred to the United States. There are 79 officially rated, quote, low-level detainees recommended for release to other countries under a resettlement policy. But that policy must still overcome major hurdles. Earlier this month, 6 low-level detainees were ready to board a plane to Uruguay when the agreement fell apart at the last minute. For many, the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center represents American injustice, damaging the credibility of Washington's stance on human rights issues and international law while wasting millions of U.S. taxpayers' money. To discuss Guantanamo Bay, I'm joined now on the set by a lawyer for some of the detainees, David Reams, conservative columnist and retired U.S. Navy officer J.D. Gordon, and by journalist Andy Worthington, who's written a book and made a film about the Guantanamo detainees. He joins us from London. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you to the show. David Reams, President Obama, as we've been saying, made a promise, a campaign promise, to close down Guantanamo. It remains open. Well, it's an unfulfilled promise. I think that he could have closed it if he had been willing to act faster and to take the political heat. He had his mind on other issues that he gave precedence to, and as a result, I think the window narrowed considerably, and now he has very little wiggle room left. Andy Worthington in London, has Guantanamo served any purpose? We are told on numerous occasions, we were told that it saved American lives, that it made America a safer place. Did it?
No, it didn't, no. All it did was be a source of shame to Americans who believe that their country upholds the rule of the law. It's been a disgrace from beginning to end, and it's a disgrace every day that it's still open. So really, you know, it's very timely to be asking, as we approach the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks that prompted the whole thing, how is Obama going to close it before he leaves office, if he is going to do? J.D. Gordon, should it be closed?
No, absolutely not. I think that it's important to understand that the United States is at war. Guantanamo has helped protect American lives and lives of our allies as well. We were attacked, and it was not a war of our choosing. Guantanamo has been good in the fact that it's kept dangerous terrorists off the battlefield, and in fact, nearly a third of those released already went back to terrorism, and they became leaders of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
That's a very disputed statistic.
Leaders of the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and a suicide bomber in Iraq who killed 13 people. So I think before people are in a rush to free so many detainees, they had to take a look at who they are and why they're at Guantanamo in the first place.
I think that the idea that they returned there and gone into the battle is Pentagon propaganda, that there have been very few documented cases. There have been a lot of allegations, but very few have been documented. The second point I'd make is that it's merely an assumption that the detainees at Guantanamo are dangerous terrorists. After all, the administration has approved what is it, Andy, about 89 or 88 for transfer on the ground that they're no longer, if they ever were, a significant risk to the United States. And I think one thing contradicts the other.
Yeah, 79 of the 149 have been approved for release. And also to say to JD that, you know, all the evidence that we have from intelligence officials and experts who have spoken about Guantanamo over the years, none of them have ever said that more than a few dozen of the people held there could be described in any way as terrorists. What Guantanamo has always held from the beginning, the majority of the people there were either innocent people in the wrong place at the wrong time, who were sold for money, or people who were low-level Taliban soldiers fighting what in the beginning, before the 9/11 attacks, was an inter-Muslim civil war in Afghanistan, who was swept up in the dragnet after 9/11.
So
it's never been acceptable, and it never will be, to say that the majority, the majority of people in Guantanamo were terrorists in any way.
That's entirely false.
I mean, some people were sold. Some people were sold, right?
Somewhere. I was the Pentagon spokesman for 4 years. I've been to Guantanamo over 30 times. I can tell you of the 779 detainees that were held there, according to our own review processes, about 5% should never have been there. About 5% of that 779. So what happened is some were sold, and there was not enough transparency, which was the fault of the administration. We didn't have enough transparency. So if we had released the names, the bio sheets, the pictures of them all, the world would have really seen that most of them were dangerous. Only 5% shouldn't have been there. What happened is defense attorneys, the human rights organizations held up the few people who shouldn't have been there as examples of, like, saying, look, Guantanamo has people that shouldn't be there.
President Bush released over 500 of the men who were at Guantanamo, and he did most of that without pressure from NGOs. He did most of that because of an enormous amount of pressure across the board from other government leaders, from people with a respect for the law globally. It's nonsense to say that only 5% of the people should have been held. I would say, if anything, the statistics the other way around, JD. Okay. It's 5% of the people who were there was any case for holding them in the first place. Unless you want, you know, I'm not saying that there weren't soldiers and that there aren't soldiers at Guantanamo, but these are guys who should have been held according to the Geneva Conventions, and we should now have been spending many years discussing realistically when the combat in which they were seized came to an end. Right. Because, you know, it's ludicrous for this thing to be going on forever and ever, damaging America's good name and costing untold amounts of money. Okay, Andy, I want to get to that in a moment. David Reams, let me ask you this. There are now 149 prisoners still on the island. Is there still a legal process that is taking place here, or has that been suspended? The courts, the federal courts, have pretty much withdrawn themselves from the Guantanamo issue. The trial courts ruled mainly in favor of the detainees in their habeas corpus cases, but the courts of appeals reversed those decisions. And at first I thought they were anti-detainee decisions, but then I concluded that the courts just don't want to have any part of this. They think it's a function for the executive. It's particularly sad because the judiciary really is the only part of the government that can act as a referee in an adversary proceeding. Currently, there is an administrative mechanism for review called the periodic review boards that are supposed to look at the detainees who are not declared not to be threats back in 2009. And I'd point out that that was 126 of the 240 detainees who were there at the time. However, this new review board, considering the detainees who still haven't been cleared, only heard 9 cases in its first year of operation, only decided 7. It has 55 more to go, and it's really in suspended animation at this point. So these men are effectively in legal limbo right now? They're worse than in legal limbo. First of all, legal limbo would imply that they have judicial process, which they don't. Second, they are in legal limbo in the sense that they don't have any hope of being released, at least the great majority of them, who are Yemenis and who constitute more than 2/3 of the cleared detainees. 2/3 are Yemenis, and President Obama will not return them to Yemen. Okay, JD, 2 points here. One is the point that Andy raised, and that is, you know, why aren't these men afforded the protections of the Geneva Conventions? That's A. B, why not put the men on trial?
Well, a lot of them have been on trial through the military commissions process, number one. And number two, it is a war against the United States, but they are not part of a state. They're non-state actors. They're unlawful enemy combatants, essentially. But my question for Andy is, since he suggested so many of the 779 were low-level foot soldiers, my question is, does he view the people in ISIS that are beheading people in Iraq and Syria as low-level soldiers? Hang on a second, David, please. Okay. Thank you. Does he view the people in London? It has no relevance, JD. I'll cut you off. That has no relevance to what we're discussing. Let me ask the rest of the question. Andy, I'll get to you in a moment. Does Andy view the 2 Nigerian men who beheaded Lee Rigby, a British soldier, in broad daylight on the streets of London? JD, this has nothing to do with the people who are being held in Guantanamo. That's my question, Andy. No, please stop, because this has nothing to do with what we're here to talk about, JD. Andy, let me finish, and then you can speak. Please, stop it, JD. Andy, do you consider them low-level soldiers or not? That's the question. All right, JD, let me put that question to Andy now. Andy, JD rose a number of questions there. Your response? Of course not. These are criminals. They have undertaken terrible actions. But it has nothing to do with what we're discussing. What we're discussing here is the men who were rounded up over 12 years ago and sent to Guantanamo, the majority of whom, it transpires, never had any involvement with terrorism, never were involved in beheading anybody anywhere at any time or even considering it. The majority of these people, who were either innocent people swept up at the wrong place at the wrong time, sold to the US for money because bounty payments were so prevalent, or these are people who were foot soldiers fighting with the Taliban against the Muslim Northern Alliance in Afghanistan in a war that mutated into a war against the United States after the 9/11 attacks. These people had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks and them becoming perceived as terrorists
The single blackest piece of propaganda that has been handed down for these 12 years is ridiculous, and it constantly needs to be challenged whenever it's raised by people like JD. The majority of these people are not terrorists and never have been.
Okay, David.
Well, just as a factual matter, only 10 of the detainees have been and are going through the military commission process. The 9/11 people and 5 others who are either already convicted or are awaiting sentencing, and 2 beyond that. Second,
It's actually more than
excuse
that.
me,
It's
excuse
double
me,
that.
it's not double that. No, it may have been that.
It's not double that.
I'm just correcting a stat you said that's wrong. That's all. Continue, please, David.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Well, I maintain it's correct. In any event, Secretary of State Colin Powell's chief of staff said that the detainees who were captured and brought to the United States were brought to the United States without any meaningful vetting. In other words, it was kind of random and arbitrary, and most of JD's comments assume the conclusion that the people at Guantanamo are dangerous and would wage war in the United States. If you question that premise or reject that premise, nothing he says is valid.
Wouldn't that be clarified? I mean, wouldn't we have a better picture of how dangerous these men are, what kind of a threat they pose, if they were brought to court in open trial in a federal court?
Here's the issue with the courts in the United States. Yeah. They're stacked in favor of the defendant. Just look at O.J. Simpson, for instance. If you bring the detainees to the United States...
But that's what justice is.
Well, here's the thing. We're not talking about a one-off or robbing a liquor store. If these guys come to the United States for trial, a lot of judges could just release them. Remember, of that 149, almost 50 are in an indefinite detention status because we don't have the evidence to prosecute them in federal court. But we know that they would return to terrorism. They could pull off another 9/11 here.
No, that's
rigging the justice system, isn't it?
Excuse me, I'd like to add just as a matter of statistics. Okay. Andy, if you'll just allow me this one comment, that 98% of the defendants in terrorism-related cases are convicted or enter plea bargains. Yeah. The fact that O.J. Simpson was acquitted in a civil case absolutely has no relevance to this when you have a conviction rate of 98%.
What about the 2% that get out?
Muslims accused of terrorism, it's almost 100% the conviction rate. But the main question about putting people on trial is that you can't put most of these people on trial because they never committed crimes. They were, as I keep saying, if they were not completely innocent people seized in the wrong place at the wrong time, they were people who were soldiers. In a military conflict between the Northern Alliance and the Taliban, which preceded the 9/11 attacks and had nothing whatsoever to do with international terrorism. So there is no basis on which to put them on trial. The majority of these people need to be released because the war with which they were, in connection with which they were captured, I believe, is about to come to an end. Now, you know, I'm hoping that we will see these arguments take place when troops are withdrawn from Afghanistan. But again, you know, we keep coming back to this point. These men are not terrorists.
All right, Andy. David, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to what Andy was saying and what JD was saying, but we are going to take a break right now. We'll continue our discussion about the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center and why it's still operating. You're watching The Heat.